circumstances. Um, so yeah, let's see here. One instructor, so this is something that I really, it stuck with me. A senior instructor once told me after I had kind of a bad session. He basically said, and this is really where I was at the point of learning car control and really understanding it, that the best way to learn is in an old car with bald tires. And there is more truth in that than, that there's a lot of truth to that. So yeah, again, it's really about the fundamentals and not what you show up with, that, the best tires, the best suspension, things like that. It's about really learning how to drive and being safe and having fun. That's all I believe I have, Todd.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And I know you touched on it before, but we wanted to just highlight the schedule of events for this season. You can see that actually the first HPDE event has already occurred at Jefferson, and there's a summary of both the autocross events and HPDE events on the right. So it's a great opportunity to get involved. We can certainly, if there's any questions about HPDE or autocross, feel free to ask those at the end. We'll have a session for Q&A. And with that, we'll go ahead and pass things over to Paul Gerard. So Paul, again, it's really an honor and pleasure to have you join. I grabbed a copy of your book, which really encouraged all the participants to take a look at. Just looking forward to hearing your thoughts and some of the topics and great stories that you might be able to tell us this evening. So with that, we'll go ahead and let you take it away.
Well, thanks so much again, and yeah, again, pleasure to be here, and thanks for the invite. And as I mentioned a couple minutes ago, been lucky enough to do a lot of things. Optimum Drive there on the screen being my book, and great job showing that just a moment ago. Also, the Stig stuff, that's Tony Hawk next to me. I'm teaching him how to drive around the track, and with all the celebrity stuff that used to do with theirs, including all of the driving that I did for the show, also coaching celebrities. And then the bottom center there, that's my Pikes Peak car, which I'm getting ready to jump into. Actually, again, I'm going to fly out to Vegas in a couple weeks, and we'll start our testing for Pikes Peak, getting ready for the race on June 26th. And that car is sort of the pinnacle almost. It's as fast as a modern Formula One car. It has 1,200 horsepower, 7,000 pounds of downforce, and weighs 1,800 pounds, and is capable of 5 Gs braking and about 4.5 Gs cornering, and then doing that on a mountain road. And so it's, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. I've been racing my whole life, and right now I am driving by far the fastest race car that I've ever driven in my life, on the most sketchy piece of road you could probably ever drive it on. And it's incredible. I absolutely love it. And so those are all the things, that again, that I've been able to be able to do, and I'm still current driving and still currently coaching and all that stuff. You can head on to the next slide if you like there. And the Top Gear stuff, I did from 2008 to 2016. I was primarily on the US show, though I did go over and do the UK show occasionally when needed. And I currently still work for Top Gear UK and still currently drive for the Grand Tour. So yeah, I've spent quite a bit of time with Tanner, Rutt, and Adam, but also Jeremy, James, and Richard as well on many occasions, and plenty of stuff to chat about with that too. But that was a cool job, and I'll tell you, like the hardest thing about that was that you got no practice. Like, I didn't talk to anybody on set. Nobody knew who I was. And so really they just gave me a car and they gave me instructions over a radio and told me to do something. And it was always a car I'd never driven. There were no practice runs. And I had to like nail it the first time. And so it was very high pressure, and, extremely satisfying at the same time, and also incredibly lonely because you didn't talk to anybody. but that's kind of the gig, right? And it was a very unique opportunity, and I'm still friends with. I know who the current guys are. Don't ask me, I won't tell. But the old guys, Ben Collins, Perry McCarthy, We're this little family, you know, brothers from a different mother kind of thing. So it's always cool to chat with those guys, and we have this kind of unique shared experience that we've had, you know, playing a part on a very, very successful television show. So very lucky to get to do that. And then this is something I did actually with Tanner, who's one of the hosts. We did this in 2011, and we broke the world record for jumping distance. Unfortunately, this video is not amazing, but you get the idea. It was a 100-foot drop, accelerating in this Pro 2 truck up to 107 miles an hour, and then hitting a ramp, 4Gs at takeoff. And the final number at the end was 337 feet, which the old record was 304 feet. So we destroyed the record, and we did it in a very closed sort of venue. That's the Indy 500 with 400,000 fans, is where we did that jump. And it was an incredible experience. It was a $10 million stunt, and it took us about a year to get to the point where we could do it. And the hardest part about that was the space. The record is always, and it's been broken again, by the way, don't have it anymore. But it's always broken in the desert, because you've got unlimited room, and they build a dirt ramp with a tabletop. And here they wanted an actual Hot Wheels track with a drop in, with an orange track, and you know, a very small distance to do it. So it was actually a lot of engineering for this incredibly expensive stunt to actually be able to break the world record within that tiny distance that we had available at the Indy infield. So that was maybe one of the proudest things I've ever done, but also, I'll admit, one of the stupidest things I've ever done. It was sketchy. The truck broke every time we launched it. It would break on the takeoff ramp. And so it would always kind of head off in some random direction. And you just had to kind of hope you could land it, and you know, keep the thing on its wheels. And that was like that every time. And Tanner and I probably did that jump 40 times each, in preparation for the actual time that it was going to be done in front of the crowd. So good memories and some scary ones too. And then this is the last little bit that I have in my book. You know, it's like, this is the last line on my book. Racing is life, everything else is just waiting. Steve McQueen said that in the movie Le Mans. If you have not seen that movie, it's, I think, by far the best racing film that's ever been done, as far as really capturing the actual sort of tone of endurance racing and what it's really like. I've been lucky enough to do a lot of races like that. I have not raced at Le Mans. That's still on my bucket list, but I've done plenty of 24-hour races, and there's just something special about those races, and that movie really captured it better than anything else ever has, I think. And then, you know, the rest of it really is on you guys. I mean, I can talk a lot about high performance driving and coaching. You know, I've coached everything from you know, teenage driving that we used to do at, you know, at the Jim Russell Racing Driver School. You know, I was lucky enough to have Sully Sullenberger there right after he'd landed the plane on the Hudson. Like 2 weeks later, he was there with his granddaughter in my class, and I'm like, I recognize that guy. And you know, got to chat with him about all of that, and you know, and doing those teen courses and writing the curriculums for all of these courses that I've done or hosted, or you know, are part of the schools that I've run. You know, I've done driver training since 1992, where I came back from Europe after having some success over there in Formula cars, and then lucky enough to kind of hook up with the Skip Barber organization, a guy named Simon Kirkby, who's running the Lime Rock Drivers Club up at Lime Rock in Connecticut right now. And you know, he was the vice president of Skip Barber at the time, and he basically heard me talking to my competitors, giving them advice, which by the way is not really smart, but I used to do it all the time, and I still do. I can't help myself. And Simon noticed that, and he kind of plucked me out of the crowd and asked me if I wanted to instruct. And within a few years, I was the chief instructor of their special projects group, and again, writing all their curriculums for all their programs that they were doing, and then leaving in 2004 to go to Jim Russell and doing the same thing there, but starting from scratch, including building buildings and 26 Lola Formula 3 cars, and speccing all the parts out on those cars, data systems, wheels, tires, engines, everything was all under my domain. Writing all the curriculums, bringing all the instructors on board, training them, and for what were the fastest school cars in the world at the time, and they're still pretty close to that. It's a full-blown F3 car with a turbocharged Evo 9 engine in it. So I went through all of that, and again, after that, writing Optimum Drive, which is sort of the culmination of all of it. And from that, to me, it was sort of this. It was born out of frustration a little bit. I'd read all the racing books out there, and I've been reading them my whole life, but I hadn't ever seen one that was really talking about the important things. Like, to me, all the driving and racing books are about how to make you good at it, and that's not, to me, is not interesting. I'm curious as to why so few people become great at it. What are they doing different? That was my question. What's the difference between good and great, not how do I get good? And so my book is about that. It's about the specific things that the top 0.001% of drivers are actually doing, and why they're able to be 2 or 3 or 4 tenths faster than anybody else, even other professional drivers. So those are the things I like to talk about, and that's what Optimum Drive was all about. And yeah, if you have any questions for me, fire away.
Paul, I got one for you, just to kind of kick it off and get in the right direction. Within this community, I mean, assuming there probably are some club racers on here, but say if we just kind of keep within the realm of autocross, which is competitive, but HPDE, which is not. But a lot of us progress from autocross to HPDE. And for a lot of us, the culmination of HPDE is simply getting signed off solo. If that is your highest level of achievement, how do we kind of grade ourselves? So you're talking about going from good to great. How does an average HPDE student that's in a program like the BMW Club that has heavy instruction and like we talked about in the planning meeting coming up on this, mandatory skid pad and your opinion on skid pads, how do they become great? How do they kind of value themselves, beyond just, hey, I'm signed off and I'm pounding around on the track on my own?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Matt, because I think you described a lot of people right there, a great majority of people, and I that was also one of the big points in Optimum Drive was trying to get people to kind of break through that plateau that people, inevitably end up in. They plateau. They don't know how to go faster. They're just doing what they're doing, like you said, kind of pounding around. And I think it comes from, and you mentioned a little bit, but if you wanted to like even take a step back from that, there has to be this fundamental curiosity in you wondering how good you can get. And it's a very personal thing. This has nothing to do with, I just want to be faster than my friends. This goes way beyond that. This is like, what is my ultimate potential? And they talk about things like, 10,000 hours, best-selling books on how to become, competent or an expert at something. I think 10,000 hours is about expert level. And it misses the point where if like you can spend 10,000 hours practicing anything you want. And if it's not focused, it's not rational, and it's not honest, you're just wasting every one of those hours. So there has to be some sort of process in place where, through the club, you give them the next step and send them out to do it. A continuous education that should never end. Like till the day you die, you should keep learning, is my philosophy. Because I'll give you, I'm 57 years old. I just learned how to sail. I'm terrible at it. I love that I'm terrible at it. I don't plan on being terrible at it forever, but I have this new challenge. And I think that's amazing because it gives me the chance to really focus and think through process. Again, driving, I've been doing that my whole life. Many other sports I've been doing for a long time, but giving myself something new, that's interesting. And so within driving, it's the same thing. It's always trying to be very rational, very honest, and find a process and, find someone that's like that thinks the same way you do, that shows up in, at the same, HPD events that you have, and kind of push each other and question each other and have these conversations. most of the cool ideas that I've ever had about driving, a lot of the stuff that's in the book is stuff that I learned just talking to like-minded people, especially if they were better than me. Seek them out, find them, and ask them lots of questions. Talk them into riding with you. Whether it's at an autocross or on the track or whatever it is. These opportunities give us process, and they give us a roadmap. They give us steps so we don't plateau. And that's the trap that people fall into, and that's when they start modifying their cars. They think that's as good as they get. And the fact is, and it is a fact, every single person, even all of you on this that I have never met before, I'll say something about you. You have the potential to be a great driver, not merely a good one, a great one. Someone that if they tried hard enough could be a successful professional driver. The reason I say that is I know tons of them, and they're all normal people, but the difference is they never allowed themselves to plateau. They kept learning and pushing. They had this curiosity. How good could I ultimately get? Initially, it was, could I be the fastest person in a run group, right? And then it just goes, and then they end up in amateur racing, and then they end up in pro racing, still wondering if they could be the best that day, and they keep pushing. And one day they're standing on a podium somewhere in a professional category going, wow, that was a hell of a ride. So every single person on this planet basically has that potential within them. It's just sort of how willing and motivated and rational and honest and determined they are. And stop modifying your car. You're going to sell that car at some point. As a driver, you get to take anything you learn yourself, and you get to take it into the next car. That you get to carry the rest of your lives with you. But making one car particularly quick, sure, it's a hobby, but it isn't really improving you. And again, if that's your focus, if you want that to be your focus, then go to Matt at RRT and get your car perfectly prepped. Absolutely, but the focus should be on you as the driver, and always having another step, not just seat time. That's what people say. Oh, I just need more seat time. No, it has to be focused. It has to be rational, and it has to be, done in a way. We talked about skid pads and all of that, where you're not ingraining bad habit, because you could spend 10,000 hours trying to become an expert on it, never get good at it, let alone an expert, because you've been ingraining bad habits the whole time. So you have to have this sort of rational reality check at any given moment. And that's the people around you. That's the books you read. Those are the drivers that you follow and maybe idolize that are out there professionally racing right now. All of those things are, kind of don't let us lie to ourselves and let us get lazy and just plateau. There's always something to do. There's always a way to get better. It has nothing to do with natural talent. That's a fallacy. That's just an excuse we tell ourselves not to have to work hard. Nobody has any natural talent driving a car. Everyone learned to do it. And if you see someone that's your age that is way better than you, that's the easiest thing to say. Oh, they must be supernaturally talented. But if you go back and find their backstory, they earned that. They worked at it. They just started younger than you or had a better situation, but that doesn't mean you don't have that potential as well. So no natural talent. It's all earned, and you just have to get to work and focus on the driver, not the car.
Paul, we have some great questions coming in. We'll get to those questions while we're on the topic of your philosophy. And you mentioned natural talent, and that's, of course, the no natural myth of natural talent is one of the chapters in your book. Can you also talk a little bit about how you applied the philosophy when you were an instructor with some of the schools, and how, when we were in our prep session, you talked about, you didn't want to leave any of the drivers behind. It was important that the cohort move together. And just talk a little bit about that, and maybe share some of the examples that I think emphasize your point about the myth of natural talent.
Yeah, and that's a great segue to that too. So thank you for that. And what happens often, and this is a criticism of every school out there, all the racing schools. They're basically written, their curriculums are written for the top 10%. They're trying to discover talents, right? So notice I didn't say natural talent. They just want talent. They want people to show up there that have karting championships, that already have amateur championships, and they want to take credit for them and push them through a curriculum and say, look, we have another Indy driver that came through our school. But the big problem with that is the 90% that get left behind. And so what I used to try and do was create, and still do, is create curriculums. And first of all, you have to start with just this simple truth. They're not slow, you're a bad teacher, right? If you can't teach someone and you want to make excuses, I didn't have the time, or they're not super sharp, or their car's not very good, or whatever it is, you have to take responsibility yourself. And if you're trying to teach yourself, same thing, you have to take complete responsibility. Again, I keep talking about being rational and being honest. Those are very hard things to be, because it's very easy to make an excuse instead of being rational and honest. But when I was writing these curriculums, I wrote them for the bottom 10%. I wrote them for the people that hardly ever drove a car. And I built enough time in, and I started at a very, very low level. I didn't assume they knew anything about driving when they got there, because I've actually had students show up at schools, not just teen schools, but schools generally. Like, you get someone out of New York City, they don't even have a driver's license. They've never even drove, and they get this, this 3-day driving school at this, this professional school as a Christmas or birthday present, or a Father's Day gift or a Mother's Day gift or whatever it is. And they're showing up, they don't even know how to drive. And you're all of a sudden you're panicking when you're registering them, realizing they can't drive a manual. They don't even know how to drive a car. And like, how do we get them out? Let's get them out. We got to get them out there right now and teach them the basics, or they're going to just, they're never going to make it through this curriculum. And so it's thinking like that. Like, I've got to be ready for them, and building from there, and building the time in, and then realizing, like, saying things like, oh, eyes up, that's not helpful, because eyes up are a symptom of them being scared and surprised all the time. If they can't look down the road, they're not comfortable. Any of you guys right now, like, think about that for a second. If you've never thought about it, you might not. The only reason you can't look down the road is you're not comfortable in that moment. And then you have to kind of hit pause, and then you have to sort of dissect, why am I not comfortable? And the question and the answer might be, I don't know this track. I don't know this car. I don't trust these conditions. I'm afraid the car might understeer or oversteer right now. I think I might be going too fast. Like, those are the reasons people can't have their quote unquote eyes up. They can't look down the road. More precisely, they can't think down the road. That's actually what we're trying to do. We're not trying to look, we're trying to plan, right? That's what looking gives us, the ability to kind of compress time a little bit, head into the future, kind of visualize the next corner while I'm in the current corner. And that way I can nail the next corner. And then when I'm in that corner nailing it, I'm not being surprised. So I'm thinking about the next corner, and I'm coming up with a good plan for that one too. How'd it work last time? What can I do better this time? Drag a little more brake in. Oh no, I had oversteer. No, less brake in. All right, less trail brake this time. You come up with a new plan every time. And so all of those fundamentals you have to look at, and you have to take apart. And it's like computer code. You got to figure out, like, where your flaws are, because you don't want the blue screen of death, right? When you're out there driving through, turn 3 at Summit Point, or going down the chute on the big track. It's not a good time for that. What you want there is that ability to look through and go, okay, I'm about to approach the carousel. What am I going to do different this time? As you got the car in a tidy little perfect 4-wheel drift through the chute. That's ultimately where we want to be, right? And to do that, you have to kind of take yourself apart as a driver, figure out where your flaws are. Think about, like, boot camp and what you would do. If any of you have been in the military, probably not a pleasant experience, but what they do is they disassemble you, and then they reassemble you as a soldier, and they don't care how you show up. They don't care if you're 99% soldier already. They're like, nope, we're going to take you all the way down to nothing, and then we're going to put you back together perfect, so that the unit can trust you, and we can work together as a team. And that's how you have to think of yourself. Like, and that's where, to Matt's point a few minutes ago, where he was talking about the importance of the skid pad, and that fundamental training, meaning that nothing the car can do in a corner will surprise me, whether that corner is a second gear corner or a fifth gear corner. If I'm driving the car at the limit, I can catch any sort of slide that's going to occur, because I'm pushing those limits as I'm driving this car. That's the thing that allows you to look ahead, to think ahead, to have eyes up. So it's a big, long journey, but the journey starts with rock solid fundamentals, and rock solid fundamentals come from your willingness and your honesty and your humility that allows you to go back to the skid pad over and over again until you can literally have a conversation with someone riding you on the skid pad while you're fixing understeer and oversteer slides. At least now you've got it, at 25 miles an hour. It's another level to do it at 45, 55, 65, 155. But the journey has begun with good fundamentals, and that's how you do it.
Thanks, Paul. Paul Cito. Paul Cito is our club president. As many of you know, I know there's some other guest members that are joining us as well. But Paul had some pre-submitted questions, and we want to make sure that for the folks that took the time to submit those, that we get those asked, and then we'll jump over to the chat. So, Paul, go ahead with the pre-submitted questions.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I think this one goes to Matt Olson. This is from Brian Gobo from Washington, D.C. He says, I plan to run a non-M E36 318i four-cylinder in showroom street class. This chassis has known vulnerability in the rear chassis with cracking. But unlike E46s, where there was no recall nor factory-approved fix or TSB to my knowledge. Any comments on this from RRT or experienced drivers or instructors? I will have that part of the car inspected before the next event, so I'm wondering about installing the common reinforcements in the Classic.
Yeah, so I thought about that when you said class. So I'm going to make the assumption it's autocross. And if I'm not, the answer still kind of holds. Yeah, you definitely, particularly in an older car like that, you want that, inspected, particularly if there's a rust issue. But I do kind of want to keep this focused on driver for this event. So I will point you to finding a good shop that can look at things like the rear trailing arm pushing pockets, and also posing that question to a group like Spec 3 group on Facebook. So they are probably the heaviest users of the 36 chassis. So NASA Spec 3 group, that would be a good resource as well if you want free advice on that. Otherwise, lots of good shops in the area, including mine.
All right, thanks, Matt. And this next question is from Daniel Allen from Fairfield, PA. This is for Paul Gerard. What was it like to be the Stig and work with Jeremy Clarkson?
Good question. The first thing I would say that Jeremy, James, and Richard are exactly how you imagine they are. They're not actors. So the characters that you see, them, being on Grand Tour and back in the Top Gear days, that's them. They have their own little things. James is Captain Slow, Richard crashes all the time, and Jeremy likes using hammers on everything. They have their little things, but they're that's who they are, like as individuals. And you learn that when you go out to dinner with them, for example, or whatever. There's no turning that off. That's just who they are. So I will say that all three of them are really bright, and they're all really funny in their own way. And I think that's why it works so well together. They have different senses of humor. Like, Jeremy is the big ape that likes smashing things, like I was referring to, and is incredibly brilliant. He's definitely the one that kind of runs the thing overall, including like the director and the producers, which drives them crazy. And it had something to do with why he ended up getting canned from Top Gear. He was so difficult because he was always coming up with ideas. And in the beginning, I was part of the team. I was like, driving the director around in a camera car, and all I heard him just like cursing at Jeremy all the time, going, "What's he doing now? He's changing everything. We have a script." And so I was like right along with the director. I'm like, "What's this deal with Jeremy Clarkson? This is like the first one I ever did." But then I started hearing what Jeremy was saying when we'd stop at the side of the road, and he'd go, "I had an idea." And the idea was always brilliant. It was always way better than what was written down for the script. And the show is not scripted, by the way, but it is like loosely scripted, sort of storyboarded. So that's how they do it. And then, you know, as it goes along, they sort of fill in all the blanks and they build out a show out of it, and then they edit it all down. And so that's kind of how that always worked. And so from that point forward, I was just like, I was always on Jeremy's side because I was like, he's brilliant. Every one of these ideas. And then the other guys, when they would show up, so, you know, we'd pull over with Jeremy and we'd be talking about this new idea. And then, you know, James and Richard would pull up and they'd jump out and they would all just go right away to Jeremy, and he would say, hey, I thought about this. And Richard, it'd be really funny if you did that. And James is already like, yes, I get it. I'll do my thing. And then we'd go shoot it. And it would always be better than what was, you know, what they thought they were going to be doing. So that was the cool part about that, was you kind of realized sort of that brilliance that Jeremy, James, and Richard had together, and really why the show ended up being so entertaining, because all the best bits were the parts that were just sort of improvised along the way.
Thanks, Paul. We're going to go over to the chat with some of the questions. So I'm just going to start at the top and then go down. If I'm somehow mischaracterized a question, then you know, or anyone wants to ask a question by coming off a mute, we can do that too. The first one I see is from Steve, and he said, suppose you're working on a track and trying to lower your time, where generally, if available, would you recommend a learning driver start looking to reduce time, reducing coasting, focusing more on VMIN in the corners, et cetera? Steve, anything you want to add or clarify to that question?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Thanks, Paul. Really, it's, I guess the question is, if, you know, you take the logging devices and everything and you're, you know, beginner, intermediate, going to an advanced driver, what would I, you know, you say you've got some basic tools. What are the things I start to look at as areas for, you know, improvement with metrics that I could gather, right? Like maximum speed on the straightaway versus minimum speed in the corner. I mean, just sort of thoughts on, you know, Paul's thoughts on how it would help a student approach that problem.
Yeah, I think that, Steve, that's a good way to look at it. I mean, I remember, you know, because I'm as old as dirt, but I remember all we used to have was a tachometer, and you just look at your RPMs, you know, coming off the corner, trying to find another 100 RPMs on exit. You know, this isn't a formula car; it doesn't even have a speedometer, you know. So they just had like very basic tools, and a lot of it, I think, if you think about like fundamentally, now we have so much, you know, from all the different systems that are available, you know, all the way to, you know, kind of unique stuff like a Garmin Catalyst, for example. There's a lot of different ways to kind of nudge yourself along. But to me, like to my biggest thing, again, I will always go back to fundamentals, and I will say that what you want to develop, and you could do this autocrossing, by the way, and get very good at it, and then apply it to the HPDE stuff out on the track. But it's developing a feel for what fast is. And it is a very specific thing, and it involves the relationship of front and rear tire slip angles, which sounds really boring, but that's really what we're doing. Like, that's balance, and ultimately that's speed. And so it's finding places where you can safely think about that, you know, and realizing, like, I'm responsible for the balance of my car. I can take it into the corner understeering. I can take it into the corner oversteering. Neither of those are the limit of the car. They're a self-imposed limit because I took the car into the corner poorly balanced. You know, so the idea is that you need to develop a feel for what fast is, and you need to do that in an environment where it's low risk, i.e., like, you know, skid pads, parking lot exercises, autocrosses, that sort of thing. And then it could take you and drop you anywhere on the planet, in any vehicle, on any surface, and you know what fast feels like, you know, and you can just use the data system for confirmation instead of even for instruction at that point. So, you know, data systems are for engineers. Drivers, as they go up the level, don't really need them because they know what fast feels like. So those are some things I would kind of add to your great comment, Steve. I mean, I think those systems are fantastic, but ultimately, being able to feel minimum speeds, as they said, and understand the differences in balance you could take the car into the corner with that will increase your minimum speeds. That's what we're after. We're not after a number, we're after a next step.
Thank you.
The next question was from Joshua. What other reading sources would you recommend? I have the Carroll Smith series, Prepare, Tune, Drive, Engineer to Win. Are there others you would look at?
I love those books, by the way. I think the Carroll Smith books are fantastic. I would say that the Skip Barber book, Going Faster, when I wrote my book, I wrote it as sort of the psychology side of Going Faster. Going Faster did a really good job with the mechanics of the corner line and all that kind of stuff, right? Just it has math in it. And then I wanted to write a book, and I did, with no math in it, that was just all feel-based. And then you put them together, and that's kind of your perfect combo, theoretically. So that's sort of what I tried to do. So I would definitely recommend Going Faster. I'll say something, and some of you may find this a little bit controversial. Those Perfect Corner books are terrible. I ended up getting into a long discussion with the writer of those books. He only sim races. They're not based on actual real car physics. He starts talking about Euler's spiral and all sorts of weird things. And I'm like, what in the world? Why? And so I actually messaged him and started talking to him to find out what his philosophy was. And I found out he was a sim racer. And the sims, by the way, are not based on perfect physics. So those books are flawed for real driving. They're flawed for sim driving. So I would stay away from those Perfect Corner books. Everything else, I think, has a little bit of something to add to the conversation, the Speed Secret stuff and all of that. But I wrote my book because I was frustrated with all the other books out there. So I might not be the right person to ask.
Thanks, Paul. There was actually one question that we missed going down the list. Can you share some aha moments during your driving career?
Man,
I'm sure there's a lot.
yeah, I mean, I've had so many, interesting. I'll tell you one that was really cool. So the first time I ever got in a race car was in France at the Winfield School at Paul Ricard, and it was a Formula Renault car, and I had never even driven on a racetrack in my life. So that was my biggest aha moment ever, was when I realized that my BMX racing and my ski racing had prepared me incredibly well for driving a racing car. And I was fast right out of the box. And that was shocking to me. I thought there was going to be a really steep learning curve. And there are a million others, like that stupid truck 55 feet in the air at 107 miles an hour. That's an aha moment. And not hitting camera crews and things like that. And there's a lot of epiphanies, like, I'll say, and here's a good one. When I read the book Flow, which is not a racing book, and I can't pronounce the author's name. It's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, something like that. But the book Flow, you can get on Amazon, and that's when I started understanding the zone and what flow really was. Sort of us at peak performance, being able to drive the car completely subconsciously at the limit, with an operating window for everything that could happen accounted for. So in other words, when you become unsurprisable, you can start to flow. And that is a big moment. Like, that's, if you're ultimately looking for the payoff for everything we're doing in our sport or any sport, it is being able to spend time in flow. So look that up and understand it, because it's really where this all takes you.
While we're on the theme of just sort of short questions, quick responses, what is the best car you've ever driven, your favorite or most fun car you've ever driven, your favorite BMW, and then the worst car you've ever driven?
What if it's all the same BMW? No, it's
that could be true. This is BMW Plus, so I had to throw a BMW in there somewhere.
The best car I've ever driven, I'm going to say now, probably I'd have to say the Pikes Peak car, because it is this evolution and I've been chipping away at it for years. The RRT 328 got pretty darn good. Where we stepped it up and we were, putting the thing on podium every time and winning races with it. So I've got cars like that scattered through all my history. I mean, that's always the job, right? Like that's my job, is to get in the car, start working with the engineer, and get the thing to the point where I can flow in the car to, tie it to what I was just talking about.
I was just about to say, Paul, you brought up the 328. So I've got the trophy downstairs when you got hit and still kept the podium when you had rear toe out at Jersey.
Yeah.
So that's made me think about when you talked about flow, just like, because I remember you getting hit. I remember looking at laps to go and where we were and pit stop cycles. I'm like, we're never going to make this.
Yeah, and it's a shame because it would have won that race with the toe, and that was true
easily.
Also Lime Rock as well.
But we kept the third. We kept the third.
James Clay drilled me on purpose. All you James Clay fans, I've made up with him now, but I wasn't happy at the time. He hit me on purpose because he knew I was going to win that race. But yeah. Favorite BMW. Boy, I mean, there's so many cool ones. I love the current M2. It's so good. It's such a good car. I mean, if I had a soft spot for anything, I'd say obviously like an M1. I also have a big soft spot for the E39 M5 because I did a couple of years of schools where we did so much drifting in those cars. This is like when that car was new. And people still come up to me about those hot laps we used to give on those cars. And those guys, that was Tanner and Samuel Hubinette and Rich Rutherford. They went on to win, and Reese Millen in there as well. The first 6 Formula D championships were guys that came out of that program as my instructors. That E39 M5 was amazing. And I remember driving Steve Dinan's M5 with the V10 that was supercharged. I drove that to the MotoGP race, and that thing would outpull sport bikes, all sport bikes going to the MotoGP race. That was an impressive BMW. So I have so many BMW moments over the years. So good stuff. But my favorite car to drive is definitely the Pikes Peak car, because it's so fast, right? There's just nothing that can compare to that.
If you could buy any car today, what would it be, either new or old?
That's easy. Gordon Murray T50. Now, and there's a long list after that, like Lamborghini Miuras and things like that, like classic cars. But if I could have one car, I would have a T50. Manual transmission, center seating position.
2-seater.
Now, what's that?
T33.
Yeah, 3-seater. Yeah.
All right, we're going to go back over to the chat. So Brian asked a question: how has the newish proliferation of data logging devices been incorporated into HPDE and or racing schools? What should first-time or newish students be aware of when using these devices? I think we touched a little bit on that, but anything else that anyone wants to elaborate on, Paul or others?
I can give you the big trap everyone falls into. You can't read data until you can read all the channels simultaneously. Looking at a brake trace, a steering trace, an acceleration trace, or a lat G trace individually is not helpful. You have to be able to see the car in your mind and read the traces simultaneously to really understand what's happening. Now, for things like brake application, well, that's really good to see on data. You can do that. But to figure out why you're not fast on data is incredibly advanced. Most people end up just going down a rabbit hole with it and end up in paralysis, analysis paralysis with data. So that's the pitfall, is you need someone that can interpret it for you in the beginning, that can read all the channels simultaneously so they can give you a complete picture of what you're doing with the car. Individual channels are not helpful.
So the next question from Scott is actually somewhat related. If you have one GoPro, where should you mount the autocross, or where should the autocross mount go to get maximum benefit later in learning from the day's runs?
I mean, since I was talking, I would say in a way that you can see both, obviously, as much of the course as possible and your inputs at the same time, as much of your inputs. So kind of, center of the car over your right shoulder kind of thing on a harness bar or roll cage that would be my first choice.
Yeah, I would second that. Or alternatively, a lot of people will do the exterior of the car right near the driver's door handle or over the shoulder that way to give you the view of the course and see the inputs in the wheel. But ideally, if you can get something center, or maybe even you can get a little bit of downward angle to see what the feet are doing on the pedals if it's not too dark down there. You might sacrifice a little bit of seeing the course, but focusing on your inputs, that would be the best spot. Me personally, I run 2 GoPros. I run one out the windshield and one over my shoulder for that purpose. So I've got one view of the course, one view of myself and my inputs.
The next question was partially addressed in the chat, but I'll go ahead and ask it anyway, just so there's other insight. If the skid pad is and can be so important, why does it seem to be an event that is even rarer than autocross or HPDE? I think one of the responses that the skid pad is part of or at least this club's HPDE events, but other thoughts on that?
I battle this all the time, all over the world, not just in the United States, but I go and do things similar to this, if not just going and teaching other places. And so I think everyone thinks they're too good for it, to be honest. No one wants to go back to the skid pad. You're like, oh, I got signed up. I can drive on the track. Good riddance. I never have to drive on the skid pad again. I think it's in a mindset, a poor mindset, thinking you can, spend 10 minutes on a skid pad and learn everything there is to learn. Just to give you an idea, when I'm coaching someone, even someone from IndyCar that I've never coached before, the first thing I do is take them to a skid pad. And I have never, they always complain, and we always have a blast in the end, and we always learn something. It doesn't matter how experienced you are. Fundamentals never go away. They need to be constantly drilled and re-drilled. And you can do different things. Like the thing about a skid pad is not drifting, and it's not big CPR corrections. It's the subtle stuff. It's detection of understeer and oversteer. It's being able to do that better than the other person, where you can detect understeer so precisely that the other person doesn't even realize the car was understeering, and you've already made your slight little throttle or steering or combination correction. That's the stuff that's really important on the skid pad, and that's the stuff you're trying to ingrain. And as I mentioned earlier, you're trying to get to a level where you can have the car dancing at the limit with tiny little adjustments happening to keep the car perfectly balanced while you're having a conversation with someone sitting next to you. That's the goal. Raise your hand if you're at that level. I've met very few people ever, even IndyCar drivers, that are at that level. And that's where we get to before I let them off the thing.
The next question is
before we leave that, just to comment on how you can get more time on a skid pad or where those opportunities are. With our club, we do offer, and this is delving a little into the HPDE, but before we leave it, we do offer some Friday slots for some extended periods on the skid pad, and occasionally some groups will rent just the skid pad for the day. So you just got to kind of keep your eye out for those. But those days where you can have extended periods on the skid pad are a huge benefit. And autocross specifically, using the Washington circuit like we are now, both ends of that surface are skid pads. So you get some skid pad time built into the autocross course just as a matter of the course design for a lot of our courses.
Yeah, thank you very much, Fraser, for mentioning that. And right now you can actually go sign up for a skid pad on Friday if you'd like, just to let you know. Thanks again, Fraser.
Yep. Everyone do it.
Thanks, Fraser. Thanks, Joe. Yeah, and there was some comments about more skid pad time. The next question is, as an HPDE solo driver, I was wondering if you have any recommendations for racing schools. I think that was question was for Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're, you know, they're all kind of similar in a way. The idea behind it is you know, trying to find a school that is at a track, you know, a destination you want to go to, and gives you the, you know, sort of certainly the best level of instruction. I'm kind of hemming and hawing a little bit because God, it's all over the map. Like, you can go to one Skip Barber school and the guy that's leading it is a rock star, and you can go to the one that's the next week and they're not. So it can be a little bit hit or miss. I am not currently teaching at any one of those schools, you know, myself. And so it's when I was running Jim Russell, I made sure it was incredibly consistent, and we had, you know, or Skip Barber, and we had the right people always, but it's just not always like that. I'm just being realistic. But I think you can go to the one I was actually impressed with, you know, recently was actually the guys at Jim Russell got sold to Sim Raceway, and Sim Raceway has turned into Sears Point Driving Experience, I think they're calling it. So that still has the really good cars, the F3 cars, on a really good track. If you haven't ever driven Sears Point, it's a phenomenal track. So I probably would start there, and then, you know, see if there's something available there. And then if not, you could always go and do the Skip Barber thing. There's no Bondurant anymore. That's Radford. I'm not sure what they're currently doing, to be honest. So there aren't a ton of choices. There's Polecat, which is another small school that's done on a private track in the Southeast. I'm trying to think of the other one as well. Lucas Oil, the Lucas School as well. So any of those have some pretty decent people in them. The pro schools are different. It has a very different intention, where the driving is in cars without stability or traction control systems, and they spend a lot of time on fundamentals. That's what makes them better, is because it's a simple car and a simple curriculum with professional instruction. And when I say professional instruction, not guys that do it for a living necessarily, but guys that have raced professionally at that level. They're within a couple of tenths of a pole time. Those are the folks you want teaching you.
The next question is it's near and dear to me as well, since I own an M Coupe. What's the opinion of the E86 Coupe 06 to 08 years, and what mods should be considered? This is the M Coupe, Z4 M Coupe.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what you're talking about. The fundamentals are always the same. You absolutely, I mean, assuming the car's in good working order, you've got decent set of brake pads and everything like that. Absolutely make sure you got a fresh alignment on it, that by somebody that knows what they're doing. You know, you're not driving with a unneeded asymmetrical setup, or something that's, you know, fundamentally unsafe just from the alignment. Make sure the bushings are in good working order. You're not getting alignment change dynamically as you're braking or accelerating excessively, right? Or that the change isn't excessive. And then on top of that, make sure your shock absorbers in good working order, right? They don't have to be top of the line, brand new coilovers, but, you know, they shouldn't be 50, 60,000 miles old either. You know, any car you're talking about, start there. And notice I haven't even mentioned tires yet. So those are the main things.
Yeah,
but yeah, if you're talking about starting with that, I mean, that's a pretty good platform to start with.
Yeah, just to kind of build on that a little bit, Matt, agree with what you said 100%. I would also, just as a little bit of a cautionary tale, don't make your car, and Matt would tell you this too, as would any good shop, don't make your car too stiff. That's a really important thing. It's super tempting to go too far, right? And I get in cars like this all the time. I'm like, how long have you been racing it like this? So I'm like, oh, I've had it like this for a couple of years. And what happens when they get too stiff is they lose their communication with you. And so what you end up with is you end up with spring rates that are up near the tire's natural spring rate. and you end up with a snappy car, snap understeer, snap oversteer, very difficult to drive, very slow, overheats the tires quickly, and you're chasing it the whole time. And so here's the simple phrase: compliance is king. You want the car to be stiff enough that it doesn't roll the shoulder over with whatever the maximum camber is that you can or are allowed to run, or whatever the limit is on that car. That's it. You don't want it to be any stiffer than that. Any stiffer than that is just compromising feel of the limits of the tires, and it's going to make the car harder to drive. So you want the car as soft as you can possibly get it without it rolling the shoulder over on the tires during hard cornering. And as you add aero and as you add grip and you go up in the categories and you do all that, then those numbers are going to change, but that still fundamental truth is true. Never make it stiffer than it needs to be. You always want it to be borderline soft, not borderline stiff.
Yeah, the problem is a lot of people compensate with poor shock absorbers or dampers with overly stiff springs, and they think they're moving in the right direction.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
You're just making the car so hard to drive. And here, I'll give you the ultimate example. So that MV8 hypercar, that Pikes Peak car, that thing is a pussycat. Okay. And it has to be. It weighs 1,800 pounds and has 1,200 horsepower with 7,000 pounds of downforce. That car cannot be snappy. So we spend all of our time making it progressive and communicative so that I can drive a car that fast at its limit. Because could you imagine a car like that being snappy on Pikes Peak? You know, so all I ever do is chase compliance with suspension setup, never stiffness.
Thanks for those responses. Those are all the questions that I saw in the chat. Would anyone like to come off the mute and ask a question directly to any of our speakers or Paul?
Hey, Paul. This is Val. I got a quick question. So can you share a example of a race or a competition experience that you had where there was a competitor that was just slightly faster than you, and what did you do to be competitive, or to make up that difference, to be competitive with that person?
That's a good question. So obviously they're not going to share data with me, so that's out of the question unless they're a teammate, and then I'm still going to have to wrangle it out of their cold dead hands. But the best thing to do in that situation is follow them. The simplest, isn't it? Would just be to follow them. I think that's kind of the way it's always been done. You know, even today, where you'll kind of linger in the pit lane until that person goes by and you try and tuck in behind them and figure out what they're doing. I mean, hey, you could always try the honest approach and just walk up and ask them. that is an option. I might try that first. But usually in racing, like I said, no one's really willing to share their deepest, darkest secrets if they're faster than you. And the only way you're going to figure that out is to kind of, get on their tail. And of course, what happens a lot of times in professional racing is they're not fools. They realize that, and they'll actually, do weird things and drive offline or just slow down to the point where you get frustrated and you go past them, because that stuff's all closely guarded. But it kind of goes back to my point, Bao, about figuring out what fast is anyway. So you kind of always know. Like I'll tell you, like for me, if there's any point in any corner or anywhere along the track where I know the car wasn't perfectly balanced and I didn't have it cornering at 100%, it drives me freaking insane. Like I just like have this alarm that goes off in my head going, you overslowed there, or you overdrove there, or you didn't have the car balanced there. So it's, kind of, and the funny thing is like you could do that in isolation without another person on the track. And if you filled in all those blanks and you're like, I'm driving my car to the limit everywhere around every corner, my brake application is as hard as it can possibly be, as late as it can possibly be, I don't need, like I said, I don't even need to look at the data. I know that's fast, right? So that's ultimately where you want to go. is have this feel for what fast is. And that's where you develop those fundamentals like we keep talking about on the skid pad and at autocross, where you have this feeling of flow, and you can feel that perfectly balanced car right at the limit, and you're 100% confident that you're the person putting it there, and you're also confident that if you're on the right tires and it's a competitive car and setup, that it will be at the front of the group. It will win races. It's always been like that.
Paul, earlier you mentioned your involvement with the Grand Tour. I was wondering if you could comment at all, a little bit of behind the scenes on the Grand Tour season 1. The opening scene is pretty epic. Is there any behind the scenes tidbits on that? Was it shot and as epic a way as it looks when you're watching the show, or was it done in a lot of bits and pieces and then kind of stitched together?
Well, it's always done in bits and pieces, just because the locations are all changing, right? So I might have a moment where I'm on I'm trying to remember the name of that road, going the highway, where I was in the Mustang doing 190 miles an hour, past an under an overpass, and they were filming from the overpass, so like that's a shot. Or pulling out of the parking lot at LAX airport, the parking garage at LAX, was the very first scene that I did there. But then we're also driving across the dry lake bed at El Mirage at 130 miles an hour, with a helicopter coming head on to us, and 3 cars driving abreast in those situations. And then we also came upon that group of the 50 super cool cars, like all those cars they had put together. It was such a cool thing. Just walking around looking at those cars between takes, and driving through those cars at speed in dust where you couldn't see past the hood of your car. So there's like these petrifying moments as well that are within those scenes too, and everyone's like, oh wait, you double for the presenters? And like, yeah, we double when it's too dangerous or too boring, then we double. The rest of the time they're driving.
Were those all the owners of the 50 cars you mentioned on the salt flat? Were they the actual owners of the car driving?
Yeah.
Or how did that scene come together?
Yeah, no, it was all the owners of the cars. And we had that guy Barry from Storage Wars. I remember him. Like he had this really cool old hot rod that he was driving, and they were just all these like kooky cool cars. And yeah, it was amazing. They had what's that guy's name? Busy. I call him Busy, but he does that tuning for the Porsches and stuff like that. Like he builds street legal 935s. Bisimoto, I think, is the name of his company. I've known him from other stuff I drove. He built a crazy minivan for Rutledge that had like 1,000 horsepower in one episode of Top Gear US, in the US show. So yeah, it's just all this, group of people. The owners are driving, and those guys had to drive across that desert. They were driving like 25 miles an hour. They had to do it all day for like 2 days, and those cars and them were all covered in dust. I mean, it's a slog, man. It's not pleasant. There's plenty of times where I've been so cold and so wet and so tired and have to do another take for Top Gear, and I'm just like, God, can I just go to my hotel room? I'm so over this. So there's always stuff like that, because you're just pushing limits the whole time, and it wears you out. 18-hour days where you're cheating death all day, and you do 7 of those in a row. It's like you just want to go home and curl up in the fetal position.
Yeah, thanks for that. So, Paul, we'll give you the last word if there's any final stories or words of advice you want to share. There was a question about how do I convince my family motorsports is a good use of my time, and I don't know, maybe that kind of relates to the metaphors in your book. That it's there's some broader life lessons as well. But over to you if there's anything that you wanted to talk a little bit about on that front.
Yeah, I mean, I think to that point, like once you figure out this process, like I kind of stumbled across it a couple times. Like I said, I was racing BMX bikes, I was ski racing. I got pretty good at that as a kid. My parents, you notice there's like no car racing. I went to a track in France after I graduated from college. It was the first time I'd ever been in a race car in my life, because my parents forbid me for doing it. Like they wouldn't allow me to do it. And so I was respectful, and I didn't do it until I was on my own. Basically, I graduated from college, and that's when my career started. So I get that. I'll tell you, like I said, that the cross training, there are a lot of sports, mountain biking is a great one. I was just riding my bike today and yesterday, and Matt knows me well. I'll be riding it tomorrow. I'll do that as much as I can because it's much cheaper than driving race cars. So cross train, find things that are similar, do that. And the lessons of becoming great at something are universal. And so you'll find that if you find any one thing and you take it to this level of diminishing return where most people plateau and quit and go, oh, I wasn't talented enough. Again, that's code for I wasn't willing to continue trying. That you can take that process of whatever that thing is that you get great at, and you can literally apply it to a marriage, a relationship, to your work. You can apply it to anything, and it works because it simply is a process for kind of punching through all the excuses we always come up with human beings and just keep on working at something until we can reach a level that's would probably astonish not only everyone that knows us, but us as well.
Well, thanks again, Paul. We wanted to, I guess we'll end on a thank you note. So first off, thank you to Paul Gerard for just sharing all of your wisdom and insight. Just a wonderful event this evening, and we're really lucky to be able to spend a little bit of time with you and hear about all your experiences and terrific stories as well and adventures. Thanks to RRT for helping to organize this event, as well as your sponsorship of the club and the autocross event. And thanks to Joe and Fraser for providing the overview of these each of the programs with autocross and HPDE. So I really appreciate the opportunity. And if any final words, we'll go ahead from any of our guests or RRT would like to hear those. But thanks again so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'd just like to again thank Paul, and also point out that I think myself for sure, and then Paul as well. Our reasons for being here should be very transparent and basically just economic, right? I would very much like to thank all the volunteers here. There's no financial incentive for them to be here. There's no business reason for them to be here. They're just very hardworking, and without them, this club goes nowhere. And I think if you think that they work a lot, I think you would probably be shocked to know how much these guys really work. So I work with a few of them throughout the year, and there is so much that goes on in the background. So big thanks to all the volunteers.
And thank you, Matt, for having me on, and everyone else as well for all the cool questions. Definitely fun to get to chat with you guys. If you're interested in my stuff, I have a website that's theoptimumdrive.com. The book is Optimum Drive. You can get it on Amazon. And I do have a Facebook page called The Optimum Drive as well, where I put blogs and things like that. So if you like what you heard or this is interesting, certainly go check out any of those resources, and I'd love to come out and see you guys at the track. But it sounds like you're doing the right stuff. Again, I do so many of these where they don't have skid pads available at all. All of that. So all of you guys that are here with the BMW Car Club here, you're in a good spot. These guys are doing it right. They care about you as a person and improving you as a driver. And like I said, that's more than I can say for a lot of these that I do around the world, around the country. I also want to point out, Paul, you mentioned your Facebook page. If you want to engage with Paul, he's very active on it. So if you have more questions, there's your route to do it. I get all my ideas from you guys.
All right. Well, thanks again, everyone. We're going to call it an evening, and look forward to engaging on Facebook and other platforms or through the club events. So thanks for everyone, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Matt, great job.